This month we are doing applique again, and yes, I can already hear some of you groaning. I promise we'll take a break from it after this month. Your kit contains 5 background fabrics, and you can use those on any of the flowers you want to. There are 2 longer strips and 2 smaller squares. Those are for daisies. And then there are 3 bigger squares, and then 3 other squares that are slightly bigger than these guys for the centers on the fried egg flowers. Now, the daisies are exactly like the ones we did on the watering can. I have already done those, and I'm not going to show you how to do those again. If you need a refresher, you can go back to the video on the watering can. I have not trimmed my blocks down yet. I did give you pieces in the kit that were bigger than what the pattern called for. Go ahead and do your applique on them first and then trim them to size. For today's blocks, you can certainly use any of the methods I've already shown you or any other one you choose. You could use the raw edge fusible. You could use starch and press. You could use a freezer paper like I showed you last month. This month, just so I'm showing you another option to put in your toolbox, I'm using a method that Eleanor Burns uses in her books. I am using a Fusible Interfacing. This side has a fuse, and whether you can see the shine in the camera or not, I don't know. I chose to use Formflex, which is a woven fusible, and the reason I picked Formflex is it's a little bit less stiff and thick. So I'm hoping that I get flatter applique. I will admit this is not a method I usually use. I personally like to turn my edges by hand, for the most part with the freezer paper method I showed you last month, if it's a simple shape. But to use this method, you're going to take the pattern, place the Fusible Interfacing over the pattern, and I'm going to trace it onto the non-fusible side, so the side that doesn't have the sticky. You can trace with anything you want. I used a Frixion pen because I had it handy, and I already did it off camera, so it may not line up exactly. Do leave space between your flowers so that you have room for a seam allowance. So I have the fabric for my first flower face up on a flat surface. I'm going to take my trace flower and put it on the square. I just want to make sure I have a seam allowance all the way around. You do not need to cut it out. The fusible side is down. You will not want to press this to the fabric until you're done. I'm going to pin my interfacing to my fabric, and then I will take it to the sewing machine and stitch on my drawn line all the way around. Don't leave a hole for turning. I will probably shorten my stitch just a little bit so that I can get around the curves easier, and I will also use an open toe foot so I can see my lines easier. I have stitched all the way around the block. I did not backstitch. I did cross over a couple stitches just to make sure. I didn't backstitch because I didn't want the extra bulk. I did end up shortening my stitch length. I went to a 2 on my machine. My next step is going to be to trim about 1/4 inch all the way around the edge, and I will have to do a couple clips into my curves too so that they turn smoothly. So here it is, all trimmed and clipped. My next step is to put just a slit through the center of the interfacing. Make sure you get just the interfacing. You're going to want to pull it away from the fabric. It doesn't have to be too big a slit, but you are turning through it. So there's mine. And then you're just going to turn it right side out. So I've turned it. You're going to need to get in there and really work to get your seams smoothed out. I'm using the tip of a hemostat. You just need something that's not a sharp point that you can get in and work the edges. Now, if you'll notice, I don't know if you can see or not, the fusible is now on the outside edge, so I can't take an iron to this side. But when I get ready to put it on my background, I can press it down and the fusible will hold it to the background while I stitch it however I choose. Now, if you would like to press this with an iron before you put it on the background, you can do that on an applique pressing sheet. Make sure you don't press from the interfacing side or you'll gunk up your iron. My applique pressing sheet is over 20 years old, and it's a little bit different than what's available now, but it works exactly the same. And as you can see, they last for a long time. So I can just come in with the iron and do my edges, and if it sticks to the applique pressing sheet, it will peel off and there will still be sticky on the back. So I can go around the edges and press them. I really don't want white showing, and that's one of the things with this method to work, to not have the white showing. Once I'm happy with my piece, then I just can bring my background, wrinkled, iron it. I can place my flower how I want it on the background, and then I can fuse it in place. I probably need a little steam. And it's going to hold it there for me to stitch however I choose to stitch. If you want to stitch on the sewing machine, you can, or you can hand stitch it now. You could do a decorative stitch. For my center, which is a big oval, I'm going to do exactly like we did on the watering can. I'm going to cut my piece out of the heat-resistant template plastic, do the gathering stitch around it, and then applique it on, and I'll show you that when it's done. Here is my block completely finished. I did mention that one of the drawbacks to this method, in my opinion, is that the white sometimes shows from the interfacing. On this block, I did a hand blanket stitch all the way around the edges, which helps to hide that little bit of white. If I turn it right here, you might be able to see that it shows here. I just hand stitched down the center after I did the starch and press method. So that is done using the fusible interfacing. Because it is not my favorite method, but I wanted you to see it. I did the other two just with my freezer paper method. It's a little bit flatter, but if you like a blanket stitch, it doesn't have to be by hand. You can do it on most sewing machines. And then the other two blocks, which you already saw, were the two daisies. I have trimmed these down to the measurements in the pattern. The daisies, I just want to tell you that I used the same template as I used for the watering can, and if you do that, you might want to trim off just the edge of the template here to make them a little bit smaller. I just barely fit this in onto the square once I trimmed it down. You will not be getting directions on putting the whole quilt together until the very last month, but I thought I would show you some sections, so if you want to get a jump start, you can do that. You have all of these pieces already completed. These two pieces you should have cut in month 1 with the filler blocks. These are our sawtooth stars, and these are our checkerboards. So it's one filler block on each side of the sawtooth stars, and then sew those two together, and then add the checkerboard down the side. This is not something that is required for your homework, but I know several people kept asking, can we start putting stuff together? So there's one section. And here's another longer section. These were the stars where we stacked and slashed, and on the bottom of that are 3 of our half square triangles and 1 just plain filler block from month 1. It does not matter which colors you put together, whatever you like with it will work. Below that, I have stitched our watering can, and below that are 2 of the pinwheel blocks. So if you want to do that, go for it. You just be one step closer to finished when we get to the last month.